Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to Watch One, and thanks for logging on. Well, yesterday's comparison between the Audemars Piguet Royal Oak Offshore 44 and the Hublot Big Bang Ferrari must have struck a chord on the channel because it got a phenomenal response. So if that format's going to work for us, I'm just going to run with it. And today we've got two watches that make for a fantastic head-to-head because the Vacheron Constantin Overseas Chronograph, stainless steel and titanium, as well as the Audemars Piguet Royal Oak Chronograph, stainless steel, are basically cut from the same cloth. In so many ways, I can't think of a more directly comparable head-to-head, because we have two watches, each from a member of the Swiss Holy Trinity of fine finish, high horology houses that, along with Patek Philippe, cut their teeth in fine finish in refinement and elegance during the mid-20th century in the dress watch sector, and then extended that mastery into the sports watch sector during the 70s. Equally, these watches compete head-to-head in the market, and finally, each one is powered by a variation of the Frederic Piguet 1185 integrated chronograph caliber. So let's dive straight into this comparison with the Vacheron Constantin. Now, this is the junior member of the rivalry, having originally debuted in 1996 and returned in its present form in 2004. The Vacheron Constantin Overseas 42.5 millimeters represents a little bit of a more modern take on the high-end sports watch. Again, the Audemars Piguet may have gotten a running start, but the Vacheron was later to the party with a few newer tricks. And to that end, the watch includes a slightly larger case. Now, I'm going to show it to you on the wrist. My wrist is 6 1/3 inches, 16 centimeters in circumference. And on the wrist, I really get the impression that this one wears more like the offshore version of the Royal Oak. It has broader lugs. It has a broader case stance. It's less of a watch that has great length and paired width, and more of a watch that's about as wide as it is long. It's got more of a cushion profile than the Royal Oak, and for that reason it wears larger. Also, the fact that this particular example features a leather strap means that it's got just a little bit of springy flair to it, in as much as the strap is quite new and still has a little bit of the OEM rigidity to it. But what does set this watch apart is the distinction between the metal of the case and the metal of the bezel. The case being stainless, the bezel being a sandblasted titanium. There's both a finish contrast, a physical contrast, in as much as they're two parts expressed separately, and then there is a tonal contrast and a contrast in color. So there's really a second step here, and in as much as both bezels read as separate parts, this one reads as a little bit more distinct because it is a completely different metal with a completely different finish. Now, moving inboard to the dial, Vacheron easily wins the complications battle. You've got the chronograph, yes, but whereas Audemars Piguet expresses a jump date window at 4:30, Vacheron Constantin complicates the Frederic Piguet caliber to add a double digital jump date at 12 o'clock. It's bigger, it's more legible, but there's also a difference in design philosophy at work here, in as much as this one is designed for high contrast, whereas the date of the Audemars Piguet Royal Oak chronograph is specifically designed to be unobtrusive until you want to see it. A smaller aperture, a smaller numeral, and of course a monotone date disc that matches the color of the dial causes this one to blend in just a bit more. Now, in terms of how the chronographs are expressed, Vacheron Constantin wants to call attention to the sub-registers, and for that reason there's a calculated asymmetry to the way this dial's laid out, with the chronograph minutes at 3 o'clock being substantially larger than the other two registers. Moreover, there's a prominent minute scale, or if you will, 60-second scale, around the outer circumference on this prominent concave chapter ring, and that's an element that Audemars Piguet does without. Although there is a minutes and seconds scale here, it's blended into the tapisserie dial itself, whereas Vacheron, in an effort to make the chronograph more legible, has a large, fully expressed and bold rehaut or chapter ring, fully calibrated for use with the chronograph seconds or 60-minute scale, depending on what you're trying to time. But the bottom line is, another major difference is the texture of the two dials. Now, right here we have what Vacheron calls slate. It's a matte sort of metallic with a little bit of a sunburst finish to it. So it does shift in the light. It has a texture, it has a grain, it does radiate outward from the junction of the hands, but it's not nearly as pronounced as the traditional tapisserie or waffle cut, hobnail, if you will, of the Audemars Piguet dial, there's a lot more texture going on, and here's where Audemars Piguet takes the lead a little bit. This watch has a lot more personality per square millimeter of dial than the Vacheron does. The Vacheron works as a whole, whereas the Audemars, millimeter by millimeter, has something interesting going on at almost every point on its dial. Now, Audemars is going for high reflectivity, both the way the light plays across the individual square sections of the hobnail and the way the light plays across the faceted white gold indices. They explode in direct light, whereas the Vacheron is going for legibility with fully loomed applied white gold indices. Both of these watches do glow at night. The difference is that the Vacheron, in true sports watch fashion, glows like a torch at night, whereas the Audemars Piguet is more of a gentleman's sports watch. It was a pioneering high horology sports watch, and so it still has those dress watch roots, being minimally loomed and also finer of case, of dial, and of bracelet. Now, I do want to emphasize that in terms of sports watch pedigree, the Vacheron definitely takes the lead, being water resistant to 15 meters as opposed to the 5 meters, 15 ATM as opposed to the 5 ATM of the Audemars. The Vacheron is water resistant to 400 feet. The Audemars Piguet nominally really just over 100. You don't even want to swim with this watch, whereas this watch is approved by Vacheron for snorkeling, shallow submergence, swimming underwater. Audemars Piguet, although it does give you screw-down pushers and a screw-down crown, has this watch limited to 50 meters, and to be perfectly honest, with the overpressure, the static shock that can be caused when you dive into water, when you thrash underwater, I wouldn't get this watch wet. This watch, good to go. Naturally, you want to put it on a rubber strap, but that is an accessory that Vacheron includes with the timepiece. I'd also like to call out the fact that Audemars Piguet and Vacheron both see fit to fit a solid caseback. The distinction here is that Vacheron features a somewhat more engaging image of the fully rigged sailing ship that is the icon of the overseas line. Now, Audemars Piguet gives you the traditional royal oak raised lettering and logo, but the distinction even beneath the caseback is that Vacheron, just as they supply a higher degree of water resistance, supplies a higher degree of magnetic protection. Solid casebacks are always a good start for protecting a watch from magnetic fields and hairspring magnetization, but the bottom line is that Vacheron also includes a soft iron cage inside to provide additional insulation against high-powered wiring looms, subwoofers, if you have a powerful computer system in your home. Now, beyond the caseback comparison, I do want to compare the clasps. Now, in this case, it's a bit apples to oranges. Although each features a deployant clasp, the fact that the Vacheron's is on a strap makes it challenging to directly compare them. What I will say is that in each case, the sense of solidity and substance, the fit and the finish, although clearly different, one being principally brushed, one being principally polished, it's equally impressive. I don't feel that either one is finished to a higher standard, composed of better materials, or more thoughtfully designed. Each one is quite beautiful in its own way and a pleasure to operate. And speaking of operation, this is where the streams kind of merge. Each watch features a variation of the Frédéric Piguet 1185 caliber. Now, Audemars Piguet has one tradition of decorating it and finishing it. Vacheron clearly goes a little bit further, adding their own grand date complication as well as caseback magnetic shielding. But the fundamental truth is that each watch features this 37 jewel movement, and the bottom line is that in each case it's a column wheel chronograph movement. It has a vertical clutch for smooth integration of the chronograph seconds hand as a continuous seconds hand if you would like to use it as such. That's the nice thing about having a vertical clutch. The chronograph seconds hand, which you can see plying its trade around the circumference of the overseas dial, can be run safely and constantly to give you center seconds rather than relying on the small sub-seconds dial of a traditional chronograph. With a lateral clutch or a horizontal clutch coupling, you will wear down the chronograph drivetrain if you run it constantly. With the vertical clutch, that's not a problem. Now, the vertical clutch, again, present in both, has the advantage of being able to stop without staggering and start without jump, unlike the lateral clutch. Because each watch features the same essential column wheel architecture, That's the selector mechanism that actually cycles between the functions. The vertical clutch engages it. The column wheel is sort of like your transmission that's engaging, disengaging, and it's very crisp. It's the harder way to build a chronograph. It's the more expensive way to build a chronograph, and it is harder for the watchmaker to tune, but for those who are fans of high horology as such, it's the only way to go. Now, I can't give either watch the advantage in fit, finish, or materials because it really is a dead heat. But you can see from the side that there are differences in finishing philosophy. Audemars Piguet going with a case that's predominantly brushed with a few hand-beveled polished highlights, and Vacheron focusing much more heavily on expressing polished facets of the case, as well as using differential materials. This bimetallic arrangement is both more technical and a little bit more distinct as a break between the case and the bezel than even Audemars Piguet's traditional octagonal royal oak bezel. One element that the royal oak does feature that the Vacheron does not is the expression of the bezel gasket, which you can see as the little black gap between the hoods of the case and the bottom of the bezel. Moreover, Audemars Piguet's bezel is more massive. It reads as more imposing, but it also visibly shrinks the size of the dial. So while the watches are not that different in size, the Audemars Piguet being 41, the Vacheron being 42.5, the bottom line is that the Audemars Piguet reads as a little bit smaller because the octagonal bezel, although traditional and beautiful, constrains the dial just a little bit more. Now, both of these watches are substantial in the hand, but needless to say, with full bracelet, the Audemars is going to be heavier. So what I'm going to say in the end is that the Vacheron is the more contemporary timepiece. It's definitely the choice if you actually want to use your sports watch as a sports watch. If you want a watch that is sporting in its appearance, immaculate in its execution, and significant as an article of history, you definitely want the Audemars Piguet Royal Oak. Now, the Vacheron is beautifully finished, and as it's approaching the 20th anniversary of the original Overseas, VC is beginning to put a significant amount of water under the bridge and build a real history and tradition for the Overseas. But the fact remains that with its Gerald Genta parentage, 40-plus years of history, countless memorable derivatives, as well as this gorgeous current execution of the Royal Oak chronograph, the history and the heritage aspect definitely decides in Audemars Piguet's favor. Aesthetically, it's up to you. So regardless of which is the watch that you want, check out this Audemars Piguet Royal Oak chronograph and this Vacheron Constantin Overseas chronograph on our website, Watch You Want.